I think Kansas has some creativity, and I think that they can give Missouri some looks that Missouri is not used to seeing, and that could alleviate some of the sort of back and forth in the trenches, because it's not going to be easy to line up and just move Missouri off the ball.
Pay heed, all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. Of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty, and we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And today we are going to be diving into KU football season. Kansas football's fall camp starts in a little less than 2 weeks. So we're calling this our pre-fall camp season preview. It will be a series of shows. We're going to break down the season into quarters, and we'll go through each quarter of the season. So for today's episode, we'll be talking about KU's first 3 games of the season, which coincidentally is their first 3 non-conference games. So we'll be talking about the non-conference schedule for Kansas, maybe a little bit about each team that KU is going to be facing, what KU needs to do to be successful to start the year, and go from there. And then we'll be continuing that process over the next 2 weeks ahead of fall camp, the start of fall camp, breaking down KU's schedule and giving our predictions for what we think KU will do in the 2025 season. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe, Apple and Spotify, and also over on our YouTube channel. We surpassed 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much to those of you that have subscribed over there. And you'll want to continue to do so and keep those notification bells on, because we are planning to be going live with our post-game shows after each KU football game throughout the season over on our YouTube channel. It's a great spot to come hang out after the game to either celebrate or commiserate, depending on the result, with other KU fans in our community. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. And again, if you're subscribed on YouTube, you'll be notified when we go live after KU football games throughout the season. And also, you'll want to stay tuned in and subscribed for fall camp, because we're going to be pushing tons of content from KU fall camp. You'll absolutely want to follow us on social media as well. Our podcast account is at PayHeedKCSN, where we'll be tweeting from fall camp, as we're going to have a chance to go out and see how KU is doing over the course of fall camp leading up to their week 0 game. Before we dive into the schedule and before we dive into starting to preview the start of the season for Kansas, there was a bit of news for KU on Monday. We're recording this on Monday afternoon, and that is that Kansas got a commitment out of the transfer portal from a local player originally from Raymore, Missouri. Actually played at the same high school as Luke Grimm, and that's Jaden Doss. He started his career at Nebraska. Has been there for a couple of seasons. Entered the transfer portal last week. It was a quick turnaround for him. Obviously, it needed to be a quick turnaround because of the fact that he needs to join a team and get enrolled and everything before the start of fall camp. So he committed to KU on Monday, late morning, early afternoon. It was announced that he committed to KU. It really sounds like, Kevin, it kind of came down to KU and K-State. Obviously, he's a kid from the Kansas City area, so that probably played a factor in it. And Kansas, we didn't really touch on this too much during the spring, but Kansas was interested in finding another receiver in the spring transfer portal. Obviously, they needed to totally rehaul that position room after last season, and they did a good job of doing that in the winter transfer portal. We saw some of those guys in the spring. You had a guy like Bryson Canty, who also joined the team over the summer. Jalen Daniels talked about getting all those receivers together and taking them out to California for some training. But Kansas seemed interested in another wide receiver potentially in the spring. It didn't happen for him, but instead they get Jaden Doss, who was at the time in 2022 a pretty highly recruited player. Like I said, ended up starting his career at Nebraska. Now comes to Kansas. First off, Kevin, tell me a little bit about Jaden Doss as a player and maybe what KU fans can expect from him joining the team at this stage of the preseason before fall camp.
Yeah, he was one of those guys that kind of flirted with a 4-star rating, through the process and finished just shy of that. For those of you who don't know 24/7's ranking system, a 90 and above is a 4-star. He finished as an 89 in that cycle, so certainly right there. But he's a guy that I had a chance to see in person multiple times, Nick, and as did Ryan Wallace, who, I'm sure we'll be talking about Jaden on verbal commitment as well. But Jaden's a guy that Ryan actually really liked as a running back, and it's easy to understand why when you see him play, because the second the ball is in this guy's hands, he's electric. He's a terrific return man, was a really good kickoff returner in high school, and he's an after the catch guy as a wide receiver. He's very thickly built, 6 foot, probably 200, 210 pounds, is the type of guy that can run through an arm tackle, can make that, catch on a slant route, sort of shake off a corner and get out in the open field and make something happen. He's elusive as well as powerful. I really like this fit, Nick, for a couple reasons. One, I'm a big fan of Jaden Dawson's talent. I think he's a really good player. But I think the other part is when you look at what receivers are asked to do in Kansas's offense, and especially Kansas's offense now that with Lubick coming back, you expect to have a little bit more of that option bite than it did a year ago under Grimes. How many times did we see under Andy Kotelnicki Kansas run the option and a wide receiver wound up being the pitch back, right? Like you would have Devin Neal as sort of the dive back. You would have, Jared Casey blocking up front. And then you'd have Jalen Daniels or Jason Bean out on the edge with the wide receiver being sort of the pitch back. That's something Jaden Doss can do right from the word go. And I think when he comes in, he's going to have some work to do to probably make himself a complete receiver to where you feel, okay, we feel great about this guy being out there, 45, 50 plays a game. But I do think that when you have creative offensive coaches like Kansas has, and you have Jaden Doss's talent and what he does, you can find a little bit of a package in there where he can do some things right away, where he can be out there as a guy that can get pitch relation and act as almost kind of an extra running back there. He's somebody that you can have out there to throw the bubble screen to or something like that and get the ball in his hands. And we just talked about him as a return man. Those jobs are still being battled for. And so he's somebody that could maybe throw his hat into the ring as a kickoff returner. But yeah, this is a receiver group that I think, Nick, from an experience standpoint, doesn't match up with what Kansas had a year ago. Obviously, when you had 3 guys going into their third years as starters, 3 guys who had been in Kansas's system for 3 years and all of that. What it does have, though, is it may have more out-and-out talent. When you look at a guy like Emmanuel Henderson, I'm really high on Canty. We saw Wentz do some really good things in the spring as well. Cam Pickett is another guy that, is sort of that run after catch guy who can catch the ball short and do different things. And so I think this gives you another piece who can, be a weapon this year. But honestly, Nick, after Kansas loses 4 receivers because you're graduating 3 of those transfers and then also Doug Emillion, after you lose those 4 receivers, this is a guy that can kind of be one of your key pieces, in 2026 moving forward too.
Yeah, Jaden Doss has 3 years of eligibility remaining, I believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, you mentioned it, you rattled off some of the guys that KU already has in the fold. And obviously, I think you probably won't find any bigger Emmanuel Henderson fans than the 2 of us. We're very excited about what he can bring and his explosiveness. You mentioned Levi Wentz. Bryson Canty's a guy that we've heard positive things about. Haven't had a chance to see him yet because he wasn't with the team during the spring. And then Cam Pickett as well. So my question to you about Doss is what are realistic expectations for him this season? Is he a guy that you think can crack the rotation a little bit, make some plays, or is he somebody that you feel like, hey, maybe in 2026 he's one of your stalwart receivers?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I think it's really up to Jaden Doss, right? I think that if he comes in and he's a little slow to the take and it takes him a little while to get adjusted, I think he can still have a role this year, whether that's as a return guy, the odd plays here and there. But if he's going to be a very real member of this rotation with some of the other guys they have in there, he needs to hit the ground running, and he needs to hit the ground running from the strength and conditioning standpoint, heading into, the last few weeks and then camp. And he also needs to get in that playbook and become somebody that Kansas is comfortable putting out there. Because I think when we look at this Kansas staff, one of the things that we've seen almost across every position, Nick, I think you'd agree with this, is that they don't always play the best athlete. They play the guy they trust the most out on the field. And if you're a middle linebacker that runs 4.85, but you're in the right place, you're attacking the right gap, your assignment, it's going to be hard to get you off the field. And so I really think that it's up to Jaden Doss how quickly he tackles all of that stuff, how quickly he gets up in the playbook and all of those things. The roles are there. There's not anybody back who had a major role on last year's team, and so the reps are there to be had if he can do it, but it's ultimately up to him.
Well, and you and I know probably better than most that nothing is given when it comes to being a member of Lance Leipold's football team. So, and that applies to both Jaden Doss and the receivers KU has, right? I mean, if guys aren't stepping up and doing what they need to do, that could open up more opportunities. And as you mentioned, if Doss hits the ground running and is able to get going, maybe that does open the door for him to get involved. But this is, I think, a really nice addition because of the extra eligibility. Because as you mentioned, you're losing a lot of the guys you've brought in this year. Like, you brought in some of those guys to shore up your room, and I think was really good to do so, but not a lot of them were multi-year guys. Here you get a multi-year player that you expect to reign in your program and have a chance to grow into the future as well for Kansas. And by the way, on top of that, all that, it's always nice to beat out K-State because that's kind of what this came down to.
Yeah. Any time you can go head to head with the school out west and come out with the recruiting win, then you want to take it. But yeah, I think the road to playing time at Kansas, I think, is a little bit more clear than it is at Kansas State from a receiver standpoint, at least this year. And so Doss is going to have to earn it, like you said. I mean, we've seen transfers come in. Leipold's first year, they had Mike Nowitzki at Buffalo. They knew what they had there, and he started off down at the bottom of the depth chart and had to work his way up. And I really like that because I think, the players that are in the program feel like, okay, this, they didn't just bring in somebody to go over the top of me. I have every chance to beat this guy out. And from Doss's standpoint, if he approaches it as, okay, I've got to go earn this thing, there are definitely reps and catches and plays to be had.
Kevin mentioned it earlier, but you can check out the Verbal Commitment podcast for all things local area high school recruiting. And I'm sure that both Kevin and Ryan Wallace will be talking about Jaden Doss a little bit more. As Kevin said, both of them were able to follow Jaden Doss a little bit in his high school career. Again, he played at Raymore, Missouri, which is the same high school as Luke Grimm. So pretty cool connection there. And again, if you're interested in local area high school recruiting and Kansas football high school recruiting, you'll absolutely want to check out the Verbal Commitment podcast. You can find that on Apple and Spotify. Their video portion of the show is actually, unfortunately, on the K-State channel on YouTube. So if you go to KCSN K-State, you'll find the videos of their channel. So you don't have to go like the other shows or watch the other shows of K-State stuff, but you can check out the Verbal Commitment video portion of the shows over on the K-State KCSN channel. Okay, so let's shift gears and get into this football preview, get into the season preview. We'll start with Fresno State, and we'll get to that right after this quick break. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender.
Folks, there's nothing that beats relaxing on a hot summer day and watching some baseball. And there's no simpler way to get in on the action than by downloading the Pick 6 app from DraftKings. It's crazy simple. Just pick more or less on the stats for two or more of your favorite players, and boom, you're in the mix for big cash prizes. And the best part, Pick 6 is available right here in Missouri. don't miss out on the fun. Don't settle for a smaller payout. Switch to Pick 6, and right now, new customers can get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Here's what you got to do. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN for new customers to get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Bonus picks expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Let's dive into it, Kevin. The start of the 2025 season is just around the corner. Kansas is going to be playing in week 0, so they're going to be starting fall camp a little bit earlier, and then obviously their first game will be in week 0. It's going to be at the new booth. I say new booth with quotation marks because it's not fully new, but obviously a good chunk of it is new. We've had a chance to see it from the inside. If you live in Lawrence or you're in the Lawrence area and you've seen it from the outside, it really is pretty beautiful what they've done up to this point. And they are on track for the start of the season, which is a big positive as well, as Kansas is going to be welcoming Fresno State to the booth to kick off the 2025 season. Fresno State, by the way, went 6-7 last year in the Mountain West. Funnily enough, Kevin, Fresno State played UNLV, and UNLV blew their doors off, beat them 59-14 when they played UNLV. Obviously, UNLV played Kansas and defeated Kansas as well. So they got blown out by UNLV. They ended up making the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, I believe was the bowl they went to, and they lost against Northern Illinois. So they finished 6-7 last year in the Mountain West. And Fresno State is also on the verge, Kevin, of preparing to make the jump to the Pac-12, the new Pac-12, as it's kind of coming together. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So they're a program that obviously has been a Group of 5 school for quite some time, but now looking to make a step up a little bit. And this is a program that is lost quite a bit off of last year's team, from what I could tell. If you are somebody like Kevin or like myself who has played the new college football game, and you've probably played with Kansas, if you're watching this show or listening to this show, then maybe you've got a little bit of taste of what Fresno State might look like in 2025. So an interesting team, to say the least. From the Kansas perspective, obviously, I think there's lots of questions that we hope will get some of them answered in week 0. We talked about Jaden Doss adding a wide receiver room. That obviously is a big question mark. You mentioned it, Kevin. I talked about it. We are both feeling very positively about the wide receiver room for Kansas, but the reality is there are some question marks about that, right? You are bringing in a lot of different pieces coming together with Jalen Daniels, and is that rapport going to be there? Is there going to be, any speed bumps to that group getting together, getting synergized with Jalen Daniels? You obviously have questions about the offensive line as well, with some positions still even up for grabs heading into fall camp. When you think about the tackle, the right tackle position in particular, you've also got a guard spot where you could argue there might be position battles there. So there's tons of questions on that side of the ball. And then obviously the defensive side of the ball is nothing but question marks, I would say, when you consider you've brought in 3 new linebackers that are going to be playing significantly. You look in the secondary, you're going to have some guys that you're hoping will step up along with some new faces. And then obviously, to me, the number one thing that I will be looking for, Kevin, in this game between Kansas and Fresno State is what the KU defense even lines up in. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of speculation about that. DK McDonald was very tight-lipped back in the spring. I'm assuming that's going to remain the same during fall camp. If we get a chance to speak with any defensive coaches, probably same deal. Again, if you play college football 26, the game has KU running a bit of a 5 safety look with 4 down linemen a little bit. So maybe that's what I don't know if there's any inside sources at EA that think that's what KU's going to do, but that is maybe what I am most intrigued by, is the deployment of the KU defense and just what it looks like and how effective they are to start the season.
Yeah, and they'll be going up against a Fresno State offense that has a lot of question marks themselves. I mean, obviously, you had a coaching change. The new head coach at Fresno State is Matt Entz. You might remember him from winning a couple national titles over at North Dakota State. Then he went on, and last year he was assistant head coach, I think, for defense at USC. And so he's got new coaches as well. You mentioned them playing Northern Illinois in the famous Idaho Potatoes Bowl. Well, the Northern Illinois defensive coordinator is now their defensive coordinator, Nick Benno. So, and if you remember last year, just sort of a 6 degrees of separation, Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame last year. Was,
yes,
a big win for them where they shut down really that Notre Dame offense. And so I'm interested to see the sort of what they show defensively in that. Offensively, Nick, this could look very different from what you think of when you think of Fresno State. And the reason I say that is typically you think of Fresno State being sort of this Cali team that throws the ball all over the yard and all of that. The offensive coordinator is Josh Davis, who came over from South Dakota. And South Dakota last year had 2 different 1,000-yard backs, one of which was Travis Tice, shout out Pratt, Kansas. But that's going to be what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to at least be balanced, run the ball, be physical, maybe try and catch you on some play action shots. Quarterbacks, they got a couple transfers in. EJ Warner is sort of the favorite to win that job. Kurt Warner's son, he was at Rice last year, threw 17 touchdowns, pretty good. 13 interceptions, not good. And so you wonder a little bit, hey, if he's in a spot where he's not having to air it out, if he's handing the ball off 40 times a game and sort of picking and choosing his shots, could you see a better EJ Warner this year? They also got Carson Conklin from Sacramento State. I think the interesting thing for me is Fresno State's basically starting over on the offensive line. Running backs, they do have some really good running backs. When you look at Bryson Donaldson, he ended the year hot his freshman year, had, I think, 335 yards in total yards over their last 3 games. Elijah Gilliam, they're both physical backs. And so what are they going to do against Kansas's defensive front? That's the strength of that defense. That's where you're bringing back the most experience. They also, were able to land some key transfers there at the end spots. And so is Kansas able to hold up front? And then if they're trying to run that football, your new linebacking core, your brand new shiny, you went out to get Bengali Kamara and all these guys. How does that look in a week 0 game where it's hot out at the new booth and the other team is trying to run the ball right at you? And I think another reason they might not throw the ball as much, just beyond Davis's history and all that, Nick. Last year, they had 199 catches from wide receivers. 17 of those catches are back. And so they're starting over at wide receiver as well. And so when you have a new quarterback, new wide receivers, what's the main thing that can help that guy out? It's trying to line up and run the football. And so I expect Fresno State to look a little bit different this year than maybe they have in the past, at least offensively, where you're probably going to see them come out and try to be a little bit more physical in that first game.
Yeah, by the way, the kickoff for this game against Fresno State, 5:30. So it's going to be one of the hottest times of the day, realistically, for that game. And yeah, you mentioned it. That to me reads as you look at DJ Withers, you look at Tommy Dunn. This is their game to sort of anchor the defense, right? If you got a Fresno State team that's going to come in and try to establish the run, you want those guys to step up and really anchor the middle of that defense. And, you brought back Gage Keys. What kind of role can he have? Justice Finkley, obviously. Dean Miller, who this could be a test for him too, if he's asked to do more in run support, where we really like him as a pass rusher. He's got great speed, obviously, and is really tall and long, but what if Fresno State says, hey, we're going to attack him in the run game? What does that look like? And then obviously with the linebackers as well, as you mentioned, that's going to be critical as well in terms of communication, being able to stop the run. So absolutely. I think for me, like I said, the biggest thing I look at is the defense. What's the defense going to look like? I'm talking about even just down to how are they going to line up? just things like that is what I'm most fascinated with because, sure, there are some questions for the KU offense, obviously, but the fact that you have Jalen Daniels coming back, I think kind of maybe quells that a little bit, as you expect him to be able to get everybody's ducks in a row and understand, that maybe there's be some hiccups, but you expect him to be able to guide the offense, right? But on the offensive side, I think beyond that, beyond the receivers, I like a Daniel Hishaw. A lot of preseason hype coming in for him this year. I want to see him hit the ground running in this game against Fresno State and establish himself. I think that would be a really nice thing to see because there is a lot of hype for him coming in, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders, right? I mean, we'll see what LaShawn Williams can provide. Terry Stewart's been hurt for the majority of the spring and into the summer as well. So what that could mean for him, I don't know. But I think the pressure was really on Hishaw to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And you look at Nick Benedetto and that defense that he's bringing over from Northern Illinois, they're going to put a lot of guys in the box and challenge KU to beat them, and especially beat them in the seams. They're going to play a lot of cover 3. They're going to try to get Kansas into 3rd and long. And I think when they do that, Nick, obviously you're a college football 25/26 guy. They show a lot of double mug in those type of situations where they're putting 6 guys up there, really showing you off, and then they'll rush 5 of them, but they're going to engage with all 6 of those guys before one of those guys peels off, and you don't know which 6 are coming. And so that was something they were able to do against Notre Dame when he was at Northern Illinois. They were able to get them into some 3rd and long situations and really cause them some havoc with what they were able to do in those spots. And so it's going to be such a huge key to just not put yourself there, right? To wind up moving the ball. And if Kansas can line up, if the offensive line, a lot of times it takes a couple games for those guys to kind of put it together. They may need to be a little bit ahead of pace in this one because you're going to want to run the ball and really kind of establish yourself in this contest for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want to be putting yourself in 3rd down long situations where Jalen Daniels is going to have to try to make a play with receivers that he hasn't had a chance to do so in a live game yet. I mean, that could be a recipe for some errors. That could be a recipe for miscommunication, whatever it may be. So certainly you want to avoid that. But I think it really does come down to, we've talked about Jalen Daniels pretty much ad nauseum over the course of this offseason and even going back to the spring, and really just how critical his role is going to be. And obviously he has outwardly shown nothing but confidence in terms of at media days, with some of his comments that he made. And just when we've had the chance to be around him or see him, he outwardly continues to show that confidence. And he's going to need to continue to do that because it really does come down to him to be that field general on the offensive side of the ball and understand you may be out there with, you're going to be out there with a new tackle. You're going to be out there with maybe, 2 or 3 new offensive linemen. LaShawn Williams, if he's your running back, you're going to have to direct him. Obviously, at any given moment, you're probably going to have minimum 2 to 3 new receivers on the field. Obviously, Deshaun Hanika is a guy that we have come to realize is an emotional leader for Kansas, but the reality is he has not played a snap yet in a real live game for Kansas. So that as well. So it really does fall on his shoulders, especially early in the season. Like we've talked about Jalen Daniels, as I said, and he's going to be important, obviously, over the totality of the season, I think, for Kansas to achieve their goals. But specifically, given the nature of where this roster is at, I think that's going to be even more of an outsized impact that he needs to have early in the season because of the fact of everything that I just outlined. Oh, new wide receivers, a couple new offensive linemen, new running back, new tight ends. Like, it's going to come down to him, especially even more so early in the season. Like, he'll need to have his impact over the course of 12 games. But I think over the course of the first 2 to 3 games, maybe, which we're talking about here, that impact needs to be even higher. He needs to be even more on his game. And obviously we saw last season, there was a bit of some time of him getting going, rust factor. You talked about it, whatever it may be. That can't be the case this season. Because this offense does not have Devin Neal to fall back on if they have issues. Like, obviously, like I mentioned with Daniel Hishaw, we expect him to step up, but you got to see it first. So it's going to be even more important for Jalen Daniels this year, especially in this game and really throughout the rest of the non-conference play, that he steps up.
Yeah, rising tide lifts all boats, right? And I think that at the start, he needs to be sort of that rising tide that's going to bring the guys up around him. And I do think this is a team, Nick, and I think you agree with me that by week 8 is probably going to be significantly better than it is in week 0. But the issue is the schedule is tough enough early that, and we're going to talk about the next couple games, but it's tough enough early that you could wind up going 1-2 in your first 3 games without much imagination. You could wind up going 3-0 without much imagination too. But that could be the difference. If we're looking back and saying, hey, Kansas is sitting here at 5-0 or whatever at that point in the season, you're going to look back at those early games and probably say a big part of that reason is because Jalen and Daniel Highshaw were really, really good early on. Versus if it's 1-2, you're going to say, hey, maybe they just couldn't quite get everybody, on the same page quickly enough to go ahead and win those games.
We are going to be giving our predictions over the course of this preview series. So put your money where your mouth is, Kevin. Kansas, Fresno State, week 0. Do the Jayhawks start 2025 1-0?
Yeah, I think so. I think the fact that Fresno State is going to want to run the ball really aligns with what KU's defensive strength is, and that's that defensive tackle group in particular. And we saw them get off to a hot start a year ago. They were really, really good against Lindenwood. And then, Nick, I think something that gets forgotten, with Cornell Wheeler being healthy, they were terrific against Illinois. Illinois' running game could not get going. And so I think that's going to be what helps Kansas in this one. Is I think Fresno State's going to struggle maybe to score enough points against a defense that is vulnerable, I think. But I think that the matchups on that side of the ball is probably going to keep Fresno State's score down. It's probably still going to be a fairly close game and might even be something that, hey, maybe Kansas gets a security score in the fourth quarter. And so, maybe it's a 24-17, 31-17, 24-10 type of game, but I do expect Kansas to win this one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Kansas as well. And one aspect of it that we didn't talk about as much here, we talked about it more in the past, is this is your first game in the new booth. So I'm expecting it to be an absolutely electric crowd. I think KU fans are going to absolutely show out for this game, a chance to get inside the new stadium. I'm expecting it to be an absolutely juiced up crowd for this game, which I think is going to also positively impact Kansas. And then for a lot of reasons that you outlined, I think we talked so much about the question marks that Kansas has. Fresno State is in a very similar position with some of the question marks they have. They're going to be coming on the road to a pretty tough environment, or I'm expecting it to be. So I'm going to give the edge to Kansas as well. I'll say Kansas wins. I'll go something similar to you, Kevin. I'll say 27-14. I think Kansas gets it done. So okay, both of us have KU 1-0. Great, awesome. That brings us to our next game, which is against FCS Wagner. And I don't want to spend too much time on this game, not because I disrespect Wagner, but because I think people want to hear about the week 3 game or the next game after the Wagner game, which is against Missouri, of course. But just really quick on Wagner, obviously out of the FCS, they went 4-8 last season in FCS. I believe they are in the, I think it's the Northeast Conference, the NEC, I believe is that sound correct, is the conference they're in. They played one FBS opponent last year, which was Florida Atlantic. They lost 41-10. Other than that, really not much to write home about in terms of what they've done. So obviously a middling FCS team. Kansas played Lindenwood last year, who was in their first year in FCS, I think. So this probably will be a little bit more of a challenge than Lindenwood, maybe. But what are your expectations for Kansas against Wagner?
Yeah, it's kind of a get-right game. And I'm not saying that, the Fresno State I think Kansas is going to have to show some stuff against Fresno State, Nick. Like, it's not going to be hey, you're going to come out and be vanilla. Fresno State's good enough that you can't do that. You have to come out to win the game. And I think, when you look at Wagner in particular, it's one of those where you're saying, okay, everybody get healthy. Everybody, you'll see what went wrong in that first game. Whether it's, hey, our offensive line timing is a little bit off running, outside zone, or hey, the receivers weren't as crisp on the routes as you would like. That's stuff that you want to see improvement in week 2, and that's her chance to do it against a team that, again, not to disrespect Wagner, but probably doesn't have the best chance to beat KU at Stu Booth.
There goes all of our Wagner fans. All of our Wagner fans that were listening, they're gone now.
Now back under 1,000 subscribers. But no, in all seriousness, I do think that there's a lot of value to a game like this in terms of you're still probably trying to find some position battles, because even though you settle who the starters are for Fresno State, that's not the be-all, end-all. You're never going to have any changes the rest of the year. And maybe there's a guy who thrives against Fresno State that you didn't expect. Maybe there's a guy who struggles against Fresno State that you had in your starting lineup. And so I think Wagner is a really nice second game where Kansas can work on the things that maybe it didn't do perfectly against Fresno State and work on getting better in those areas. Because like you said, that week 2 game, I believe, because KU plays in week 0, the third game is the one that everybody is going to be focused on.
Yeah, I believe I did call it week 3. Just to be clear, it would be week 2 in that case against Missouri. And I think that's exactly why this Wagner game does take on some extra importance, not necessarily because of Wagner, but because of what it means in terms of your next game, right? Like you want to go out and perform well. You want to go out and have a good showing against Wagner, so that you have the confidence going into that game against Missouri, right? You want to go out and really shore up, as you said, whatever possible question marks you may have, whether that's on the offensive line, whether that's, hey, who's our top receivers on defense. Obviously, all the things we talked about with the Fresno State game. Can we answer some of the questions on that side of the ball too, so that we can really, really hone in on that stuff against Wagner, and then head into the game against Missouri feeling really, really good. So I think that's where this game takes on some extra importance. You look back like at the Lindenwood game last year, there wasn't really much to talk about with that game, right? It was just, okay, well, here's a team that is their first year in FCS, like, good luck, I guess. And, is there going to be anything to really take away from the Kansas side? I think with this game, there will be a lot to take away from the Kansas side against Wagner of all the things that I just mentioned, which is what's the position battles looking like? What's maybe just the general vibe of the team after this game heading into Missouri, right? You really don't want to go out and struggle with an opponent like Wagner. And maybe, as you said, against Fresno State, yes, Kansas probably will have to lay some cards on the table. Against Wagner, you hoping to not have to do that, right? You want to be able to get out and not have to show too much really before that Missouri game. So in a scenario where maybe you are struggling a little bit, and you do have to maybe dip into your bag of tricks a little bit more and maybe show some things you didn't want to necessarily show before Missouri, that would obviously be to the detriment of KU in that scenario. So I think that's where this game takes on some importance, a little bit more importance, and you hope that KU can power through and then get ready for that Missouri game. So the big question, Kevin, does Kansas go 2-0?
Yes, I believe Kansas does. I don't know if Kansas will get a shutout. I mean, the defense is mostly new. They're still, figuring that stuff out. But I think, something like 51-10, somewhere around in there would probably be pretty accurate. And, hey, if you can get Jalen Daniels off the field at some point in the third quarter and let him rest up, you'd feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, sure. This could be a game where we get a chance to see some Isaiah Marshall, right? Or Cole Ballard. Depending on how things shake out there. So, yeah, I agree. I'm going to go with Kansas. I'll be a little bit more conservative. I'll say 45-7. Okay. Kansas beats Wagner. So we're in lockstep. We both have Kansas 2-0 heading into that crucial final game of the non-conference schedule, in which they will renew the border war against Missouri. We're going to talk all about that game, our thoughts on it, and more coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
So during the break, Kevin, I got on the phone. I apologized to the Wagner fans. I said, hey, no disrespect. Please, it's okay. This is a safe space. You can come back. So hopefully we get some Wagner fans back. Some fans that we hope we don't get back is Missouri fans. We don't care about those guys. You guys can stay away. I don't even care. Whatever. You guys, good riddance with you guys. But Kansas, their week 2 game, their third game of the season, though, in week 2, will be against the Missouri Tigers, renewing the border war rivalry. For the first time in over a decade, Kansas will play Missouri on the gridiron. This game is in Columbia. It'll be Kansas's first game away from home after the 2 home games to start this year against Fresno State and Wagner. And this game is going to take on, obviously, a lot of significance. Both fan bases very passionate about this rivalry, about this matchup. This has been one that has been dormant for a little while after Missouri left for the SEC, but it is going to be renewed for the first time in 2025 in Columbia at Faurot Field. This, Kevin, is going to be a big game, right? I think as we go through this process and we end up with what we think Kansas will be at the end of the year, a win against Missouri and a win against Kansas State would go a long way in the view of, I think, the fan base of how this season plays out. Obviously, you have bigger goals than that. You're right. You want to have a chance to compete for a Big 12 title, I think, if you're Kansas. You obviously expect to have a chance to go to a bowl game after missing out on one last year. But when you think about specifically Missouri and then Kansas State, who we'll get to later in the season, those are two opponents where it's you win those games, and it means more than just the W on that given Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those chances. I don't want to say to make your season, because if you go 4-8 and 2 of the wins are K-State and Missouri, like it's still not a great season. And I know some people would feel differently about that, but to your point, you still want to go to a bowl game. You still want to do all the things that come along with that. But this one in particular, Nick, I think people have had circled for, a few years, ever since it was announced. First game, going to be in Columbia. That atmosphere is going to be ridiculous. Like it's not just going to be tough, it's going to be hostile, and there's going to be a level of danger in the air, I think, quite frankly, when Kansas plays there. And to be fair, it was like that when Kansas used to play at Missouri. I mean, I covered the 2000. I went to the 2000 game, covered the 2004 and 2006 games before it went to Arrowhead, and so And so I've been there for KU Missouri games in the past, and there is an extra juice that's not just like, hey, we want Missouri to win. It's, hey, let's murder all these guys on the field, while they're here, type of thing. And so it's a different feeling even than going to Manhattan. And you and I were in Manhattan a year ago. K-State, what a great atmosphere that was a year ago. I mean, that was one of the best atmospheres that KU, has played in the last few years, I feel like. And K-State fans were tremendous, but I think there's an added element of almost like nastiness or something that's a little bit different that Kansas is going to have to work through if it wants to win in Columbia. And that's before you even get to, hey, Missouri's got a pretty good looking football team too.
Yeah, and by the way, you and I are tentatively planning on making the journey to Columbia. So if you're a KU fan and you are going to be out there, you might see us out there too for that game as well. Just a short drive from the Lawrence, Kansas City area. So we're expecting to have a chance to get out there for that game and have a chance to witness it firsthand and see what happens in the game. And yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, we just spent 5 minutes talking about that, right? The rivalry, the atmosphere. That's before we even get to the X's and O's, before we even get to the Jimmies and the Joes, before we even get to the fact that this is a Missouri team that, truthfully, they probably think they have a chance to like make an SEC title game, right? I mean, they've put together a lot of talent on their team. Drinkwitz, as nerdy as he is, as much of a loser as he is, he's a decent recruiter. I'll give it to him. I'll tip my proverbial cap to Eli Drinkwitz for being an okay recruiter, I guess. But yeah, they definitely have a lot of skill. It's going to be a tough game, even just beyond the environment. The biggest question for Missouri, Kevin, is what are we going to expect from them at the quarterback they can be heading into week one?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be Bo Perbula. I think, Sam Horn as a talented guy was a blue chip prospect, and he's a guy that could wind up playing pro baseball by the time it's all said and done. But I would honestly be a little bit surprised if it wasn't Perbula. I mean, you go out and get him from Penn State. For those of you who didn't watch Penn State last year, he was kind of their gadget quarterback that Andy Kotelnicki used at times instead of Drew Aller. And so when you look at Perbula, he's a really good athlete. great runner, strong, wants a chance to prove he can throw the ball a little bit better. And I think that's going to be one of the interesting things to see here is I really rate this Missouri receiving core, especially after they went out and got, Kevin Coleman from Mississippi State. I think they've got some big time playmakers. You look at Josh Manning as a guy that's emerging there. They've got some other guys as well. I know I'm going to forget some names, but they have a really, really good receiving core. And so I think if Pribula can come in and give them both the threat of his legs, which I'm interested to see how Missouri uses that, because I think he is more of a run first guy than some of the other guys that they've had there. But if he's able to make his throws, that's going to take this offense to a whole nother level. Are you able to get the ball to Kevin Coleman down the field, or is it, hey, you're throwing in bubble screens and things like that because you can't push it down the field is with the accuracy that you'd like to be able to do it. I think Missouri is a really interesting offense because of that. I think when you look at like Gabe DeArmond, who used to be our colleague over here at KCSN, I like Gabe quite a bit personally. I think Gabe has him, around 9-3, somewhere around in there. So this is going to be a really good team when you're talking about going 9-3 with an SEC schedule. Went out and got Ahmad Hardy, as a guy that's going to run the ball for him and be a really good running back. I know you faced off against him in NCAA football 26 and came away impressed.
Yeah. If you have the chance to play college football 26, I have a KU dynasty going. When I played against Missouri in my dynasty, Ahmad Hardy was virtually untackleable for like 80% of the game. So it was a real struggle for my virtual defenders. So we'll see how KU's real life defenders can handle him. But yeah, it definitely will be a challenge. When you think about the wide receiver room, you talked about it. This is a wide receiver room that obviously has had two guys get drafted very highly in the NFL draft this past April. When you talk about Luther Burden and Theo Weiss, so we'll see what that looks like in terms of are they able to reload. You mentioned Kevin Coleman as being a guy to keep an eye on. So I think there's some interesting aspects of the offense from Missouri, and you also talk about Missouri's schedule. KU will obviously have already played 2 games at this point. Missouri has just a week 1 game against Central Arkansas, so they are going to be in a similar boat of they're going to have a chance to play an FCS opponent prior to this game. Central Arkansas is a much more established program at the FCS level and a better program than Wagner is. But even still, I don't know if that's an advantage for Kansas that they'll get to play 2 games first, or maybe it's a disadvantage because it'll give Missouri more tape on them. I guess you could look at that however you want it, really.
Yeah, and I think coaches have gotten so good at, hey, we showed this on tape, and we have a counter to what that is, if they decide to attack it in a certain way. And so, honestly, showing more on tape, I don't think is the disadvantage that it used to be. It used to be almost universal that you would talk to coaches and you don't want to show stuff on tape unless you absolutely have to. When I covered Texas, one year, the offensive coordinator was Brian Harsin, who, became Boise State and then Auburn head coach. And he liked to do the opposite, Nick. Like, he liked to go out and throw out like 3 trick plays, like in the first game. And he's like, any time that they spend having to deal with that is time that they're spending not dealing with what we actually want to do in this game. And so I think that coaches have come around to, hey, if you've got to show stuff, that's fine. Just make sure you've got counters and different things built in for that. The one thing I will say, I think it'll be good for Kansas linebacking group, because I think that's something that could take a little bit of time, is for everybody to kind of get used to operating it as sort of an amoeba at that level, and everybody, plugging holes at the same rate. And I think it'll be good for Kansas's offensive line, which I think could be really good this year. But again, it might take them a few weeks to get there. And the reason all of that is important is I think Missouri is going to do some things, one, to try and trick up that linebacking core. When you've got a quarterback who can run like Bo Pribula, you're probably going to try and get, throw in some looks and different things that Kansas hasn't seen yet, try and get guys out of their gaps and things like that. On the other end, Nick, I think Missouri's got what looks like it could be a pretty good defensive line, pretty big defensive line. And so Kansas's offensive line, if they haven't hit their stride yet, they really need to start hitting it at this point. I know, the great Bill Connolly over at ESPN, who does SP Plus, all those things, tracks returning production, has Missouri, I think, 10th in the country in returning defensive production. And so that's going to be an area where if Kansas, struggles up front, that could really limit what the Jayhawks are able to do offensively in this one.
Yeah, one of the things that I had circled in my mind when thinking about this game is what you just mentioned, the trenches. I feel like that's going to be such a critical part of this game on both sides. When you talk about the KU defensive line and its perceived strength heading into this game with the veterans they have on the interior, you bring in a guy like Justice Finkley, who I think is going to be a really great player as well. And then you have Dean Miller. Like, that's going to be critical against the Missouri offensive line. And then, as you just talked about, on the other side of the ball, this game may go for the KU offense as the offensive line goes, right? They're going to have to, A, give Jalen Daniels time to throw the ball, and then B, obviously create opportunities in the running game against what I expect to be, by the end of the year, Kevin, I think we could be talking about Missouri. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about them because why are we talking about Missouri? But nationally, people could be talking about Missouri as a top 15 defense in the country, right? I think that's what Kansas may be reckoning with heading into this game. And obviously, as we mentioned at the start of this segment, when you factor in the crowd and you factor in the animosity of this game, that's probably going to inspire that defense even more so. So I think really the issues for Kansas is going to be on the offensive side of the ball. When you talk about in the trenches, and then beyond that, the outsized importance of Jalen Daniels that I mentioned for the earlier games in the season, obviously that comes into the spotlight even more so in a game like this, of being able to communicate, being able to settle guys down, being able to get guys in the right spots, and make sure that your play is not doomed before you even snap the ball. You know what I mean? Where if you don't have guys who don't know what they're doing, and you have guys lined up in the wrong spots, whatever play, Jim Zabrowski can be calling the greatest play of all time. If you're not lined up in the right spot and don't know what you're doing, it ain't going to work regardless. And so that obviously comes down to Jalen Daniels and his communication ability with the rest of the offense. So yeah, I'm concerned about the trenches. Certainly, that's my number one concern in this game, I think, for KU. And then with the offense, I think this game could be a real struggle for them, and it may come down to, can Jalen Daniels be dynamic and make some plays? Can Daniel Highshaw run through some tackles and get some extra yardage on certain plays? And maybe can a guy like Emmanuel Henderson take the top off the defense a couple times and maybe try to open it up for KU a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. You look at the defensive end spot for Missouri, you got two guys who transferred in from Georgia, and I can't really think of a better program to go, get defensive line transfers from. Damon Wilson was a 5-star transfer get, according to 24/7 Sports, and they don't give those out very often. And last year, they got Darius Smith out of Georgia. I think he wound up being banged up or whatever, but those are two guys at the same position. And not making it about Missouri, but talking about Kansas, we liked Calvin Clements coming out of the spring. Thought he took a step forward. He looked pretty good. They obviously felt like they wanted another tackle in that group. You go out and get Enrique Cruz. Well, okay, now you guys are trying to block it and protect Jalen's blind side, from these defensive ends from Georgia, and Missouri, I think, looked pretty good defensively with what they brought back. They went out and got a couple guys we were talking about before the show started, Nick. They went out and got a couple guys who played KU last year and did really well against KU. When you look at Josiah Trotter, linebacker from West Virginia, had 11 tackles against KU in that West Virginia win. And then, sort of the bane of Jalen Daniels, that Jalen Catalon, picking off Jalen in one of the biggest plays of that game against UNLV. He is now at Missouri at that safety spot. And so Missouri's got a really good defense. I think the depth is good there, but I'm right there with you in that I really think this could come down to the trenches. And then the other thing is when Kansas was so difficult to defend before Jeff Grimes got here, I'm not blaming Jeff Grimes. I'm just saying when Kansas was difficult to defend, when Andy Kotelnicki was here, the Jayhawks were so difficult to prepare for on a week-to-week basis because of all the wrinkles and options and motions and all the different things that they would do that just did not allow you to be comfortable as a defense. And Missouri's defense has seen a lot. Like a lot of these guys, have experience at different schools. When you're talking about Jalen Catalon being, a veteran of 4 different schools at this point. One of the things that people don't see that often anymore, Nick, is true triple option. Whether you're in the wishbone and running it that way, or you're running it the way that Kansas does, with guys motioning around and guys taking different angles, and all of a sudden, you're running the option with a wide receiver as your pitch back, and then all the trick plays and things that can come from that. Kansas potentially having a 2 quarterback set out there, the different things that Kansas can do. I guess that's a really long way to say that's the thing that I would put maybe in Kansas's favor with that, is I think Kansas has some creativity, and I think that they can give Missouri some looks that Missouri is not used to seeing, and that could alleviate some of the sort of back and forth in the trenches, because it's not going to be easy to line up and just move Missouri off the ball in this one.
Yeah, 100% agree. And by the way, I just want to circle back. You almost have to say old friend alert with Jalen Catalon, because if I'm not mistaken, he was on the Arkansas team that beat KU in the Liberty Bowl, I believe.
Yes.
He then goes to Texas, and you may recall the play against Jason Bean, where Jason Bean scrambled and Catalon laid him out. He fumbled, and it was recovered, and KU ended up actually scoring on that play. And then last year, he makes an interception against Jalen Daniels as a member of UNLV. So not only has he'll be on a different team that KU is going to play for the 4th consecutive year, he's made plays that have impacted the game in different ways when he's been out there against Kansas. So yeah, old friend alerts, or I guess old foe alerts, is maybe what we should say about Jalen Catalon in the secondary for Missouri. So, all right, Kevin, time to put your money where your mouth is. Kansas is 2-0. They're going into Columbia. Do they leave unscathed and 3-0 in non-conference play?
I'm sure somebody is going to clip this somewhere, but yes, I do think that Kansas goes to Columbia and comes out with a win. I think it's going to be really close. This is where having an experienced quarterback really helps, I think, because it is going to be one of those back and forth games. I think there's going to be a lot of momentum, and at the end of the day, I do think Kansas is able to get Missouri a couple times off balance with, some of the different things that they're going to do that Missouri isn't used to seeing from them. And I think the other part, Nick, is, I'm not sure how on Bo Pribula is going to be as a thrower. And so I think when it comes down to it, who would you rather trust in the final 3 or 4 minutes of a game, of a close game? And I realized Jalen had some bad moments in final minutes a year ago. He also had a couple big drives against Arizona State. He had the game-winning drive, and then they allowed Arizona State to drive right back down and win it themselves. But I think if it comes down to it, I have a little more faith in Kansas's ability to execute at the quarterback position in a really close game, and I expect this to be a really close game.
Yeah, I think it'll be a close game as well, and I'm gonna differ from you here, Kevin. I'm gonna tragically, unfortunately, go with Missouri, and this is a prove me wrong game for Kansas. And what I mean by that is, last year, obviously, we among a lot of other people were very bullish on what KU had going into last season. We both picked them to win double-digit games. We both felt really good about their chances to fight for a conference championship. And obviously, they kind of fell flat to start the year. That kind of upset the season, and the season ended up being what it was. And so I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to get fooled again. So I'm going to be a little bit more conservative in my predictions this year. But it's a prove me wrong game, because I think absolutely, for the reasons you outlined, Kansas certainly could go into this game and win it. When you think about Jalen Daniels and the type of X factor that he could be. But I don't know. For now, I'm going to sit here. I just think that the atmosphere might be too much. I'm really nervous about the trench situation that we talked about earlier. I could foresee a situation where Missouri is able to get after the quarterback very effectively and kind of really disrupt and derail a lot of drives for the Kansas offense, which that concerns me pretty significantly. So I'm going to pick Missouri here. I don't want to. I don't like the pick, but I'm going to go with Missouri here in sort of a prove me wrong style fashion for KU on the road. But I do think, as you said, I do expect it to be a close game. I think Kansas is going to be able to hang around. The way I'm envisioning it is, even if the KU offense gets bogged down by the disruptions up front from the Missouri defense, as you kind of said, I don't know that I would trust Bo Pribula to be a guy that's just going to be able to go up and down the field on Kansas all game long. So I think that's going to keep Kansas in this game, certainly. But I'll go with Missouri. And this could be a game, Kevin, where I think you could easily sit here, but when we get to like week 12 in November and say, man, if KU and Missouri were playing today, KU, I think, would have a much better chance of winning. But obviously, that's not going to happen. They're going to be playing them in week 2. So I'll pick Missouri here. For my score, I'll say 27-17 Missouri, but I think it'll be close for the most part.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, there are a lot of warning signs in this one. I do think when it ultimately comes down to it, there's a question with Pribula, and that's not to say that he can't do it. He may wind up being terrific, but if he hits on just a few big plays here and there, if he catches Kevin Coleman on a post route and that thing goes for a 70-some yard touchdown, I mean, it could be a really tough game for Kansas in that you wind up all of a sudden saying, hey, this guy is hitting on those passes. We can't play them to run. The flip side of that is, Nick, if Kansas is able to get Missouri into 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10 into some of those situations, it might be a better – I think Kansas is better equipped to deal with a 3rd and 7 than Missouri is, and I think that could ultimately be what leads Kansas through on this one. It should be a heck of a game, though.
So at the end of non-conference play, Kevin has KU at 3-0, and I'll have Kansas at 2-1. And Kansas will head into a bye, actually, after the Missouri game. So time for the Jayhawks to either rest on their laurels of the win against Kansas, or the win against Missouri, or maybe lick their wounds a little bit if it's a loss before they head into conference play. And we will be talking more about the rest of the schedule. We're going to kind of be breaking it down. I mentioned at the top of the show in 3-game segments. So we're done with the non-conference slate, and we'll get into the start of conference play on our next episode later this week. So you'll want to be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, if you're on YouTube or if you're on Apple, Spotify on the audio side, leave a 5-star rating and review, share your thoughts on YouTube. We love it when you guys drop comments and join the conversation and share your thoughts with the rest of the KU community. We really appreciate those of you that have done so. And once again, absolutely need to subscribe, Apple, Spotify on audio and on YouTube, as we're going to be doing live shows on our YouTube channel over the course of the KU football season. You can also follow us on our social media account, paid KCSN. You'll want to be following there because I'm sure we're going to be snapping some pictures and grabbing some videos from fall camp, which is going to be starting up in less than 2 weeks. And we'll be out there observing how things go for KU in fall camp leading up to the start of the season. So, like I said, later in the week, we'll be getting into the start of conference play. And as a little bit of a teaser, you're talking about games against West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF. We'll be talking about that coming up later in the week. That'll get us to the halfway point. Then we'll get to the rest of the schedule next week ahead of the start of fall camp for KU. But until next time, Kevin, you got anything else to add for our great listeners here?
No. Just remember, Nick picked 11-1 last year. I picked 10-2. So obviously,
yeah. So like I said, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative this year, but it's more of a prove me wrong type of thing. So hopefully they do that. But you should prove me right by subscribing to the channel. That would really make my day. So, but that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, thank you so much. And for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. Until next time, we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.